Since the birth of man, one question remains unanswered. A question, it seems, will remain unanswered until someone comes back from the dead and tells us what happens at the point of death. More than 500,000 people die in the UK every year. In this film, I'm going to explore the possibility of a life after death. I spoke to a well-known and respected Merseyside undertaker who told me that since his early teens he's worked within the family business at 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, surrounded by dead bodies. His opinion is that he's waking with the shells, the empty boxes if you like, and the bodies, the souls, the spirits which have departed, that is the last place that you would expect them to be. They would return home to their loved ones, their houses, the homes they used to live in. I went to talk to City Talk presenter Roy Basnett, who himself has conducted many investigations into the paranormal and has met many psychics and mediums. So, what would you say, Roy, was your belief? What do you believe in?
Well, I guess I'm still formulating what my belief is. One thing I am absolutely certain of is there is if you like, an external force, something that manages our lives, that if you're meant to be going in a certain direction, whatever that force is, it will guide you, it will nudge you in the right direction. I do believe that something happens at the end of days. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that is that we die, there's this huge shaft of light that takes you up into the heavens, and that's where you go, or you fly around with wings and become an angel. I find that a little bit, perhaps maybe a little bit too difficult to take on board, but I do believe that something happens. You have all these memories and things that go on in your mind, and if you were to, if you think of the things that you do, the memories that you have, the things that you've learned, that ability is stored somewhere in your mind. But if you were to open it up, you wouldn't find it, if you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it stored there? And it's almost as if, well, it isn't stored there, it's stored here, it's stored everywhere. And it could potentially be that all of those things that you know, all those abilities that you have, the memories that you possess, may well be somewhere out there in the ether. And when you die, they're all still there. And it's just a question of perhaps maybe at the end of days as well, and again, sooner or later you're going to find out, at the end of days, you go somewhere, and everything's explained to you. Every little thing that you were unsure about in your life, decisions you should have made, things that you should have done that you didn't do perhaps, relationships that didn't work out, maybe one day you will find out exactly why. Everything's explained to you. End of days.
Way back in 1958, a family living here at number 82 Wimborne Road were terrorised by a violent poltergeist. It was reported at the time in local radio and in the local newspapers. An apparition of an old lady who stood 5 foot tall, bent over with a walking stick, manifested frequently. Her face was little more than a shriveled skull. There were also reports of furniture being moved and even thrown by the evil poltergeist. A policeman and a Catholic priest from nearby St Dominic's Church were also reported to have witnessed the events at the house. As you can see now, it's due for demolition. Probably just as well. The Johnson family moved into 82 Wimborne Road on Friday the 13th of June 1958 at 11 p.m. Why 11 p.m. I do not know. The first night at their new house, Mrs. Johnson said something woke her up, and there standing by the bed was an old lady in a white nightgown. She was barely 5 feet tall, leaning on a stick. Around her shoulders was a grey shawl, and her hair was done in 2 plaits. It was the old lady's face that terrified Mrs. Johnson. She said it was the face of a shriveled skull, and stood laughing evilly at Mr. Johnson, who was laying sleeping. Mrs. Johnson gasped and said, look, what's standing over you, Jerry, which was her husband's name. Her husband seen nothing. As he turned to look, the manifestation drifted away towards the bedroom fireplace, which in them days they had bedroom fireplaces. The next night, Mr. Johnson was drifted off into a sleep when he felt somebody tugging his bedclothes from underneath him. He knew it wasn't his wife because she was on the other side of the bed. The bedroom door now started to rattle as if someone was trying to get in. He said he jumped out of the bed and turned on the light. The room was empty apart from his wife, of course. He opened the door and looked out onto the landing. No one was there. He got back into bed and footsteps started to move about on the landing outside the bedroom door. This went on till dawn. Mrs. Johnson said to the press at the time, until I moved into that house, I'd never believed in ghosts. The hauntings at number 82 Wimborne Road continue and continued. The last press report I heard was about 1988. Now the property's been demolished, as I said earlier, and who knows? I wouldn't like to live in the property that gets built on this plot. There are lots and lots of ghosts in Liverpool and all around the world, but Liverpool particularly we're concentrating on. One of the most famous is behind me here. William Mackenzie was a notorious gambler and once promised his soul to the devil to secure a winning hand at poker. Shortly after he became ill and terrified that his pact with the devil would come true, he had his tomb erected and placed a card table inside with a chair. Once dead, he left instructions to be seated at the table with a winning hand of cards in his hand. His logic was that being entombed above ground would in some way ensure the devil could not claim his soul. To this very day, there are stories of sightings of the ghost of Mackenzie and in and around the tomb of Rodney Street. I went on to ask Roy what his opinion was of psychics and mediums, people who he frequently has on his radio show.
I think that the vast majority of people that claim to have a psychic ability fall into a number of categories really. One, they're lying, or two, they're self-delusional in that they believe what they're saying is true. They believe that they're communicating with people, if you like, from beyond the grave, or they're seeing visions of the future. There is within that a very, very small percentage of people who I'm not going to turn around and say undoubtedly are communicating with the dead or can see into the future, but they certainly warrant further investigation. They certainly have more credibility than the masses. I have had a couple of readings, if you like, from people that were particularly accurate, a lot of personal information, and I'm not talking about generalisations like you're going on a long journey or you've not been feeling so good and finances haven't been. I'm not talking about that. Pretty specifics. For example, one of the funniest ones that I remember was a lady by the name of Mary White, who I've always held in high regard on this. She rang me one day for something, and I was in a bit of a state really, because I was wanting to go somewhere. I'd lost my car keys, couldn't find them anywhere, and I said, well, come on, psychic, you're meant to be in a position where you can tell me where my car keys are. And then she went, yeah, you've left them in the attic. I said, why would I have put my car keys in the attic? I said, I am seeing the attic, I'm seeing your car keys, and they are next to a black set of drawers. Well, we had a black set of drawers in the attic, and I went up, sure enough, right in front of them, on the floor. Car keys were there. That was just one example. And she said a lot of other things, personal things, that seemed to be particularly accurate, and I was always quite impressed with her. But for the most part, psychics and what have you generalise, where I've got the name F, somebody with the name F, is it Freddie, Fiona? You generalise too much with it, and I don't like psychics that constantly keep saying, do you understand what I mean? Can you take what I'm saying? I mean, that is almost like you're asking for an answer there, and it's allowing the psychic to move on. So, in conclusion on what I'm just saying there, to round it up, I would say 99.9% of them are either self-delusional or lying. It's that 0.5% or that 0.1% that I'm interested in.
Speke Hall, Liverpool. A lady we know as Mary, who dwelled here or either worked as a maid here, is said to have killed her son before taking her own life. She done this rather than face up to her husband's massive debts. Mary is said to have manifested once during a massive dinner party. The majority of guests watched in horror as she disappeared through a wall. Other people have reported the sound of children crying in the night. Quite a sad thought really, isn't it? Spirit children, ponder food for thought. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful place, but I don't think I'd like to spend the night there, would you? Right, tell us about the night you were doing a phone in with a psychic and a lady rang in from Preston.
So what it was, again, I was with Mary White, the lady I just mentioned there. We were doing a show, a radio show where people could phone in and get readings, the kind of stuff. And a lady had contacted us and she said, I would like you and your medium to come to my house. She had this 500-year-old house on the outskirts of Preston. And I said, what's the reason for that? And she actually said that she was being molested by a ghost, which I found quite amusing, really. So we went to the house. It was late. It was literally 2:30 in the morning. Because I'd finished the show. We'd gone straight from the show. We went to the house. Beautiful, beautiful house. She showed me a picture of a man looking through the window. And I thought, that's just a picture. It just looks like a picture. She said, no, there was no one there. It was a ghost. He disappeared. And I thought, right, okay. So I took a couple of video cameras with me because I wanted to record the event. And it was a square room, bedroom, where she was having these problems, if you like. I put one camera in the corner and one in the other. And we conducted a seance. It went on for about an hour. I started getting tired. And eventually I said, look, I want to call this a day. I can't go any further with this, I'm too tired. Took everything away, all the equipment. A couple of days later I decided to watch back the footage. And I noticed at one point I could hear the name, Michael. I could hear it. I thought, did I just hear Michael? Played it back and sure enough it was there. Now my first thought was, is there residual audio on the tape? Has it been recorded over again? It wasn't, it was a brand new tape. Secondly, the other camera had also picked this up. Both of the video cameras had picked this audio up. I was there at the time and I know it never happened. I never heard it. None of the other people that were there heard it. If somebody would have been faking it to get it recorded, we would have heard it. Nobody did. It's a very bizarre sound, as you will hear. It kind of comes in on an echo and it goes out on an echo. It happens twice. Once it says Michael and the other time it says Mark. These were both names that the medium picked up on. And they also were both the two names that the lady whose house we were in actually referred to. She said, these are the names that I'm getting. That, out of all of the things that I've done, has been probably the most compelling aspect of any investigation I've done. And I've done many, many of them, and for the most part nothing happens. But that one makes me think you have to keep going on. You have to keep looking and seeing whether or not there's anything more within this particular subject. You have to keep looking out. I haven't got the Michael one with me, I don't think. I'll play it again for you. This is it. Do you hear that then? Again.
We've heard a lot of ghost stories from Liverpool, from myself and from Roy Basnett. I would just like to tell a little personal story about myself and a German Shepherd dog. I've always had dogs throughout my entire life. In 1991 I got a German Shepherd dog, puppy dog, full pedigree, and called him Quincy. Out of all the dogs I've had in my entire life, that dog and myself had the strongest bond. I swear to God, that dog was like a human to me. And sadly, at the age of 10 and a half, He was diagnosed with cancer, and I held on to him for as long as possible, and sadly had to take him to be put to sleep. I buried him. I went up to collect the body at the vet, brought him back in the car, dug a grave and buried him. That night I lit 4 candles around the grave. Really, really was heartbreaking. This is a picture of Quincy, which, that's myself with Quincy, much younger of course, there. But I buried Quincy, and that was a Tuesday. That night, I was there with my mother, and I lived in a house then where I won't name the place, but I lived in a different house, and I buried him, and there was my mother and myself sitting there, and we heard something. It was unbelievable. Quincy scratch on the back door. I swear to God, I'm not lying to the camera. Scratch on the door. I got up, almost in autopilot mode, and opened the back door, and literally opened it wide enough as if to let Quincy in, as he would normally do. Of course, there was nothing there, nothing that we could see. I could see the 4 candles still burning on his grave there, where I buried him that very day. I closed the door, sat down, said to my mother, "Tell me that you heard that." She did. You know, her mouth dropped, she was in shock. 2 more times my dog scratched at the door. 2 more times I opened the door. Now that story is just one personal to me. We finally reached the end of this short look into the possibility of a life after death. And the question still remains unanswered. To quote Roy, as he said earlier in this short film, one day we'll all find out. Hope you've enjoyed it, and hope it's given you food for thought. Can I leave you with one final thought? Live each and every day as if it were your last, because one day you'll be dead right.